This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion.
My guest today is a repeat guest. He has a new book out, a great new book called The First Rule of Mastery. Stop worrying about what people think of you. My guest is Michael Gervais. Michael has had a chance to work with some of the best athletes and coaches in our time. No exaggeration. The names, you're going to recognize them all. But this is one of those conversations that really gets you to think. What is stopping you? What is stopping me? What's stopping any of us from getting to a certain mastery? Well, other people's opinions don't help us very much. And if we're worrying about what they think about us, we're already going the wrong direction. Without any further delay from me, let's jump right into it with Michael Gervais and talk about that first rule of mastery, FOPO, fear of people's opinions. I hope you enjoy this conversation. This is one of these topics, Michael, where we'll get into it, but it feels like a little bit of a shift for you, and I'll explain that as we go forward. But I wanted to read something from page 25 that I think I'm going to hang on my wall for the rest of time. It's a nice little chart. It's not fancy or anything, but it's two circles, and inside the main circle, there's another circle. And inside that core circle, it says 100% in your control. Your thoughts, your words, your actions, your attitudes. Well, that's simple enough. But then on the outer circle, not 100% in your control, the past, other people's opinions, 3-year-olds, the future, weather, traffic, cats, what your parents say the first time they meet, the in-laws in the future, other people's happiness, how other people feel, other people's actions. That's so just spot on. If we could get the world to just put that on the wall and wrap their arms around it, we're already in a much better place, aren't we?
Thank you for sharing that. And one of the fundamental best practices on the path of mastery is definitely knowing what's in your control and then investing in best practices to master those elements. I know I'm better. I can't necessarily speak for the rest of the world, but I'm happy to pontificate that I know I am exponentially better when I'm attending to my response, when I'm attending to my best types of thoughts and responses to whatever the external conditions are. So yeah, I play along with that and say, yeah, I think so.
What was the driver that made you wake up one day and say, let's start here? Because I do agree with you that this is probably the number one hindrance, the number one thing that holds people, culture, society back is worrying what that other person thinks. How did you start to go down this path? What triggered you?
After 25 years working in sport and performance psychology, working with elite performers across multiple disciplines, there was an obvious narrative that kept coming up. And one of those narratives was that they talked about being in the amphitheater and just how hard it is to be in environments of risk. And some of that they're risking is what it feels like to be judged and critiqued and having the masses shred them. And we like to think that it doesn't bother them. The truth is that there's a narrative there. And I recognize it in me too. I'm not saying I am in the same arenas as them, but we all at some point are public. We're public to our 5 friends or our 15 family members, or we're public in the company we're leading, or some of us have large social media presence. So at some level, we all are socially inclined to present well. What ends up happening is I recognized it in me, I recognized it in others, and certainly I recognized it in those that were doing the thing on the world stage. And it's this excessive worry about how they might think of me, their opinion of me, that becomes something that holds us back. We just play it too safe and too small when we're obsessed with needing approval or fearing rejection. And if I do a little bit of brain chemistry here, we are wired for that. Our brain is designed to fit in, to be part of a pack, to be part of a tribe, to be part of a community in modern times. That wiring is really important because it is a specific set of skills that we naturally have to scan the world, to check for clues, to see if we're okay. If we're checking for the clues and we're not quite sure, it is safer to default on the side of, "Ooh, I don't know if I'm okay." And when that takes place, there's a whole cascade of internal sensations like a fear response, an anxiousness response. And then there's a whole set of responses psychologically. What we end up doing is contorting and trying to conform to fit in. This is not the path of mastery. This is not the ideal way of moving through life. There is some suffering involved in this. And it was so apparent, it was so clear to me about my personal journey that I spent the last 2 years researching it and trying to make the best sense of what I found to be one of the greatest constrictors of human potential.
I like to think of myself a little farther away from fear of people's opinions, in the sense that I don't hold a job and I'm outside the system. I'm an American, not living in America. I feel that I'm a little bit on the edge, so to speak. However, I freely admit that I can look at myself and I can see, well, yes, other people's opinions do affect me. Speak to this idea, though, where you might see people that are more affected by this versus less affected by this.
Okay, so people that are more affected by FOPO are those that have had trauma early in their life. Okay, so check the box because that does rewire us in a way that is maladaptive. That's the definition of trauma. There is some of that. And by the way, just to be clear, nobody gets through this world without trauma. Big T or sometimes little t. We all have things that we've gone through. And what ends up happening in that rewiring is we become hypersensitive to survival. And that triggers a very specific mechanism in our brains to make sure that acceptance in the middle of the pack, rather than being on the fringe, is the safest place we can be. In the middle of the pack, because on the fringe of the pack is where people get plucked off. That's reserved for people that are exploring their potential. And I hope that most of your community wants to be there and also wants to know how to dry off from the rapids of life and find high ground and have a sense of safety, which I'm calling the center of the pack right now. So that is one way to think about it. The other way is, at some level, most of us, if not all of us, we were raised by thoughtful parents that are trying their very best. And with these big doe eyes, we look at them for feedback. We look at them as a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, and we're looking at these big doe eyes like, how are we doing? Are we okay? And we're becoming attuned to the importance of their sense of like, yes, you're okay. No, you're not okay. And when you spill the milk and the parent, or later in life, whatever that spilt milk is, your junior high coach or a teacher later in life, and they throw their arms up, they roll their eyes, they've got an obvious disgruntled approach to the mistake that you've made. Oh, it's not okay. It's not okay to make mistakes. And I feel a sense of rejection when that takes place. This is so primary in becoming a citizen that sense of very small rejection is the same pathway as real threat. Just the beginning makings of rejection is nearly the same intensity for many of us as full-on threat. And it's the threat to be pushed out of the tribe that certainly long ago meant that we were not going to be able to live very long, because we can't hunt and gather. We can't pitch a tent and a fire and take care of the kids. We need a tribe to do well. And that's why we're biologically wired to attune to people's expressions and micro expressions to see if we're okay. It's in all of us, is my point. David Foster Wallace, one of the things that he shared is a story about 2 young fish, and they're swimming by, and there's 2 elder fish, and the 2 elder fish say, how's the water? And the 2 younger fish say, what water? Once you become awake to this concept of FOPO, it is the water that we're all swimming in. So I'm painting this broad stroke that I think we're all available for the FOPO response. Some are really highly sensitive to it and some are not. And the only caveat I have is that true narcissistic personality disorder, they seem to be relatively immune to FOPO.
They've got a handful of other issues going on though, that are generally obvious when you meet those types of people.
Although they are just searching for a deep knowing that they're okay from validation from other people, but just has a different tone to it than what we're talking about here with FOPO.
Let me make clear, because I don't think I did yet, but FOPO, short for fear of people's opinions. People know about FOMO, so we got to make sure we clarify there for people. Let me bring it to an interesting point for someone like you. I caught the phrase in your work here that there's no finish line to cross. Now, that's an interesting expression to see in the work of a man like yourself, given your proximity to so many fantastic athletes and coaches over the years. This is something that I don't struggle with it now, but I remember as a young man, I played baseball into my first year in college. And I remember in college, I was like, okay, I'm not swinging as good as Barry Bonds. And yes, I could go grind this out and transfer to another college and pursue at a higher level and all this stuff. And I started in my mind calculate what this was going to be. What was the opportunity cost if I was just going to grind out in my early 20s, seeing how far I could pursue in baseball. And I decided this is not for me. I could see, it's like the Moneyball line that I'm paraphrasing a little here. At some point in time, someone tells you can't play the great game anymore. You have to go home, so to speak. I take this setup for me. I take the phrase from you, there's no finish line to cross. It's really interesting to analyze athletes because they are playing a game that has been set up for them. And they have to master that game inside the confines of the game. But it's not the real world game. The real world game doesn't really start until after you leave the sports game. This has always been an interesting, I don't want to say conundrum for me, but an interesting thought because I struggle with it having to stop playing sports. I mean, I really wanted to keep playing. It's one of the best feelings. But then in hindsight, looking back, I sometimes question sports. Yes, it's fantastic when we can have all these great stories and one of the biggest fans. But man, what happens when you get outside it? It's an interesting situation, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a potential risk and a deep benefit in just about any narrative that we can talk about when it comes to the psychology of well-being, especially in high-performing worlds. One of the upsides of sport is that it becomes a working laboratory that is very concrete. You can see and you can notice improvement and setbacks, and there's honest feedback loops, meaning when you release the ball, you know if you threw it in the strike zone or not, as a small example. And so sport is this wonderful working laboratory to unlock potential and to understand the psychological mechanics that support high performance and maybe even support mastery. That being said, is that what ends up happening for many people in high performing environments is that they were pretty good at a young age. And so when you're good at something at a very young age, that young age phase from 2 to 20 something is really designed to figure out, who am I? At a base level. Of course, it's a lifelong arc to figure that out, but that is the identity formation phase. And when somebody is very talented and very good at a young age, their external world, their uncles, their cousins, their aunts, their teachers, their parents, their peers, they talk to them about that one thing. And so if you were a good, let's just say, baseball player, they say, hey, how's the arm coming? Hey, how's the average coming? Hey, what do you think about this upcoming game with the crosstown rival? It's less about what music do you like, it's your social world, your grades, the heartbreaks that you're going through, and it's more about the performative aspect. So two things take place. They foreclose their identity on becoming an athlete. So they say, I am an athlete at a young age, which is a very dangerous thing to do because you foreclosed on everything else. So now you've got, mixed metaphors one more time, you've chipped all in. Your entire hand is in on this one thing, which is I'm a performer, fill in the blank, I'm an athlete in this case. And when that takes place, when that person begins to go to the mound or when they go to the hitting box, their entire identity is at stake. So that's why they start to feel all of that radical anxiety because everything is on the line. It's too much. It's a very unhealthy way to go through life. It happens to many of us at a young age when we're not sure exactly who we are and the world helps us define ourselves as just one narrow thing. That's the thing you're picking up. And there is a relationship between FOPO and identity. And I'll just tell a quick story about a legendary golfer, Ricky Fowler. Myself and Dr. Leslie Sherlin and Red Bull designed a pressure test. It was with Ricky Fowler, and it was with a local pro, and then a weekend golfer. Just every once in a while, he'd go out and hit the ball. So there's 3 golfers, and we had 3 levels of pressure. And the first level of pressure for all 3 of them, they did this separately. They didn't know each other was in the study or the experiment. The local pro goes out, and he just had to hit 15 balls into the pin, putting. The only pressure was I was watching, and there was 1 camera. Each of them did fine, pretty good. Ricky's obviously the best. And then we up-leveled the pressure, and each one of them had their own separate experience. We had more cameras in, and then there was a little added pressure, is that we're keeping score. And we asked how people did, and they said, it's a little different. I wasn't used to all these cameras, and it was just a different level of pressure. We also wired them to measure their brain activity and their heart rate and their sweat, how much sweating they're going through under pressure. And so like, oh, that was a little different. And then we brought the 3rd level of pressure. Okay, and the 3rd level of pressure, the highest pressure, we brought in a mini galley, if you will. There was probably 200 people that we pushed into these risers for people to sit and watch. We put money on the line, so if they missed the shot, it was going to cost money. And we're measuring their brain activity. And we had even more cameras with a big swooping camera in front of it, like a crane camera. And so it was on. The pressure was on in that respect. We did social pressure. We did deep, intimate pressure of observing their biology. And then we did financial pressure, putting something on the line. And what we found over this experiment is that if I were to ask you, who do you think did best when it came to pressure? Who do you think that would be? Ricky Fowler, the pro legendary golfer, one of the best in the world, the local club pro, or the weekend golfer?
It's a question to me?
Yes, that's a question to you.
I'm going to have to assume Ricky did the best, but it seems like a trick question.
It should be a trick question. No, he did the best. So he was the most consistent across all 3 conditions. Second, the most consistent across all 3 conditions was the weekend golfer. The person who varied the most, who struggled the most with pressure, was the local pro. The guy that if you and I went to play golf with, he'd wax us up and down the range because he's really good. His identity, it was connected to being a golfer. So when we added this exponential levels of pressure, there was too much on the line for him. So the weekend hack was free. He's like, oh, this is fun. My identity is not involved in this. This is really interesting. And Ricky Fowler was very practiced on psychological skills to be able to work through those pressures. He still felt the pressure. We saw an amplitude in his internal activation, but he had the psychological skills to manage it. The weekend pro, his identity was not wrapped up. He was free as could be. And the local pro, the best in the neighborhood, if you will, best in the city, perhaps, he deeply struggled because his identity was connected to it and FOPO was expressed. The main driver was the fear of what other people were going to think about him. And it was the beginning origins, if you will, of, oh, there's something here. There's something here that I think many of us fall prey to, is this constant, consistent, small little narrative about how will they think about if I say this or don't say that? What will she think about me if I wear this or don't wear that? You know, do I raise my hand in the boardroom, or is it safer to just let someone else take a run at it? That was a very important bit of research that was the origins of FOPO.
As you were talking about the identity phase a few minutes ago, it got me thinking about myself in early baseball experiences. And there was 2 things that I took away. It was the politics, what I can't control, what a coach might unfairly do, and my hard work, what I can do. I no longer play baseball, and it's been a very long time since I have played baseball. Those 2 lessons are very important, which was, again, I can't control if somebody's going to screw me over. I can't control that. That's beyond my control. However, I can get in the cage and I can go swing, and I can swing and I can swing and I can swing. And I think that becomes one of the lessons that I think a lot of people miss out on. And to go down to your example a little bit more too, is that it gets me thinking about another situation with a friend of mine that played pro baseball for a long time. And he spoke to me once. He said, I wish I could be like Lenny Dykstra. And I guess he had some experience with Lenny Dykstra. And he goes, because that guy doesn't care. He just goes up there, he swings, he's back in the dugout, and it's like nothing happened. He had figured out a way on the mind side, whether that was a developed technique or whether that was just not thinking as much, less IQ, more IQ, I don't know. But these experiences are invaluable, as you say, from a lab perspective. The real trick is the transition to real life. How do we take these sports lessons to the real life?
Lenny is this emblem in this story to go up and do something and be free. That's essentially what mastery is about, is the ability to get to the edge of your capacity, to love that edge, and to let it rip, and to not let it be a referendum on your identity, your worth, your value, or any contribution to the whole, but it is a moment to explore. The freedom comes with being able to really be absorbed, to give yourself to that moment, to meet the demands of the moment in sometimes a very creative way, because it's one of the great things about life, and certainly sport, is we don't know the outcome. We don't know how it's going to go. I barely know what I'm about to say in this conversation. You barely know how it's going to go.
Thank you. That's a very true statement.
If we can just give ourselves to the experience, there's a freedom in that. I just find that when we are authentically ourselves and we have the skills to be authentic in any set environment, that freedom is remarkable. And it's the exact opposite of FOPO. FOPO is this chronic, latent, consistent scanning to the external world to see if you're okay. It's this excessive worry that later I might blow it. I might be rejected, and I just need to be accepted. I'll tell you this, intellectually, most people go, oh, that must suck. That's not me. Yeah, I felt that from time to time, but that's not really me. That's for my uncle or my aunt or my coworker. And I've asked this question to thousands of people in public setting and private, and it's a bit of a setup, but I'll share it with you. I'll say, who wants to have a high-performing life? And imagine a room of 500 people, or whatever the number is. What percentage of people, without any definition of a high-performing life, do you think raise their hand?
I think most people are scared to raise their hand in this day and age for anything.
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe I've created some safety in the rooms I'm in, but 99%, if not 100% of people raise their hand and they say, yeah, I want that type of life. I want to have an amazing life. I don't know how long it's going to go. I don't know how much I'm going to get, how much time I have. I don't know the future, but I want to have a meaningful, get after it, high performing life. They raise their hand. And then I said, that's great. And we'd all recognize here that that means that there's some risk involved. There's some go for it involved in it. That's not the life of playing it safe and small. People like nod. And they're like, yeah. And I give some time in the talk. And then like 10, 15 minutes later, I come back and I say, okay, so we talked about having a high performing life. Who would like to come on stage and see how their mind works under pressure in front of all your friends, in front of your peers? Just one or two of that 500 raise their hand. So they say their operating model is to go for it and have a high performing life. But their real model is to be favored by others, is to have others think that they're smart and capable. And so their deeper operating system is for acceptance and fear of rejection. And I've seen this play out in so many rooms across the globe that is one of our great constrictors, is that this fear of people's opinions is quiet, it's slippery, it's invisible. But when given the moment to really go for it, we tend to tighten up. And that's why we call it choking and micro-choking, or we play it safe, or we over-intellectualize why we don't go for it. And it's a very slippery slope that I've lived it for too long myself. I've heard it in too many rooms with world's best. And my hope is that through this research and writing is that people can see themselves in it and say, I want freedom from that. And I'll wrap this part up with a slight little interesting study, a small little study, and it's known as the spotlight effect. And you might have heard about it. It was done at Cornell And what they did is they gave a bunch of kids, college freshmen, most likely they were freshmen, t-shirts, and they were very ugly t-shirts, and they had Barry Manilow on the t-shirt. They asked people to go into a room with this quote unquote embarrassing t-shirt. And then the other people that were in the room, they asked those people, did you notice that the college freshman walking into the room had an ugly t-shirt on? Of course, no one really noticed. No one's really caring. But when they asked the person wearing the Barry Manilow shirt, the ugly shirt, what was that like walking in? Do you think people noticed? And of course, the larger percentage of people said that was so embarrassing. Of course, they noticed. And the takeaway from the study is that the spotlight effect is that most people don't pay attention to you. They're attending to their own experience, but we believe that they're attending and even critiquing us. So there maybe is some freedom in the truth that, according to this research, that people are not watching you. The spotlight is not actually on you most of the time, but we act like it is.
But the spotlight is there if you want to take it. As you were talking about going on stage, I was thinking to a moment several years ago, I was given an audience to speak in front of in China, in front of 1,000 people. And I got a chance to walk the room in advance, check out the room, see the layout. I decided, because I'd never dealt with that many people, there was no way I was going to stand on the stage because it was just too big. And so I said, listen, I need a microphone so I can walk around. I want to walk the aisles, so to speak. I wish I could have that. I wish somebody would give me 50,000 people one day. Maybe I'll never get that. The feeling of just being able to stand up and share something, because we all have some story we can share. We all have something that we can teach 50,000 people. We might not think we do, but we all do. It's so fun. It's not even an ego thing. It's just fun. Sure, you've had a chance to experience all kinds of things similar to that. But gosh, if a lot of people are there and they want to give you the opportunity to share something, oh my gosh, it's one of the greatest experiences ever.
Well, part of the beautiful science of psychology is to be able to know how to work with your own thoughts. That requires an investment to be aware of your thoughts, to be aware of your inner life. And that's basically what I'm talking about, is thoughts and feelings and emotions. If we don't have awareness of what we're actually saying to ourselves and our emotional response to those streams of thought, or the emotional response to the external conditions, or more importantly, our interpretation of the external conditions, then we're not yet even in the game of high performance. And so, let alone in the game of mastery, let alone in the game of exploring your potential. So awareness is step number one. And then being able to reframe is a very technical term, but being able to work with almost like an Aikido or a Judo with your own thoughts to help them be more productive, to help them create more space inside of you, to be more of an explorer, more of a learner, more of a deeply focused person, rather than attending to the noise of the external world or the noise inside of your own chatter, to have a deep commitment to the signal. And the signal for you and me right now is just listening and responding in our most honest way. It's not about not caring what people think, but it's the freedom of not worrying. One of the uncoupling is the difference between caring what they think and worrying about it. One way to uncouple it is to have incredible love and regard for other people. It's not like, I don't care what you think. It's, no, I'm not going to worry, because I'm not going to allow my external world to dictate my internal experience. And my internal experience, for most people, they want to be connected. They want to be good teammates. They want to be good partners. The unhealthy side of most people is they want to be seen and validated. But that's not enough. It's good. It's important. But it's more important to give, because that is 100% within our control. Give attention and love and regard, and not be victim to needing it in return. There's a little bit of judo that I'm playing here, but without awareness, we're not in the game. We're not even in the arena. And then without the skill of playing judo and working with our own thoughts, we're definitely not playing the game. And third factor is that if we're not in control and sitting in the seat of power to control the way we think, rather than need something from outside of us to be okay, those are three factors that are really important for I guess we'll just call it shorthand winning in life.
A moment ago, you brought up the word explorer, the idea of exploring. This seems so critical. And I don't know how people can find their way into this. I had a chance to spend my last semester of grad school in London. It was my first international travel. And then years later, my first book was out and somebody said, hey, we'd like to fly you to Hong Kong and speak. And these kinds of experiences, they weren't forced, but they weren't completely chosen, meaning there was a setup. I wasn't just completely making these decisions with no support system, so to speak. I was going on an exploration, which I had to choose, which a lot of people will not choose. But these experiences were really formative. And then later on, for example, when I came to a place like Vietnam, it was complete exploration where I knew nobody on the ground. And then I decided I wanted to live there. And I think this word exploration is terribly important for where you're going here, because I'm taking this back to the local golf pro. If somebody spends their life in their hometown and it's their hometown friends and it's their hometown shops and it's the hometown ethic and the hometown politics and the hometown everything, and there's not as much exploration, maybe there's the occasional vacation, so you're the hometown person. Once a year, you take 2 weeks and you run over to Greece and you stand around with a bunch of other Americans taking pictures of things. And then you get back on the plane, you go back home and you repeat the hometown thing again. There is something to this exploration that if you're going to get to mastery, because the exploration allows mistakes, you get to screw up along the way, but then you learn things that the people that are not exploring never experience. And for me, I don't know if I'm at some mastery yet, probably on some level, in some capacity I am, but I would attribute it so much to the exploration. Even going back to the exploration early on as a kid who wanted to play baseball, I had to figure out what to do if I wanted to compete and advance. It seems like exploration is something that is right there with mastery. If you don't have it, I don't know how you get there.
I'll double down on it. That's why we're more interested in that phrase comes path of mastery. So it's less interested in complete mastering of craft or self, but the idea that I'm on a path towards mastery. And so mastery of self and mastery of craft are related, in some respects separate. And so the mastery of craft is this external expression of using your mind with a technical craft, using creativity to be able to express something technically. And mastery of self is a deep awareness and an ability to work with your inner world in a way that allows for joy and happiness or peace or whatever the values that are most important to you, to live consistent with those across conditions. So somebody that's truly on the path of mastery is that their external world dictates or influences their internal world far less than it once did. Flip that on its head. People that are on the path of mastery of self, is that they feel that there's a sense of freedom that they can go wherever they want to go and still be themselves. Explorer/adventurer, tourist on the orthogonal other side of it, and somewhere in the middle is being a traveler. I don't want to be a tourist. I don't want to just be a traveler. And a tourist is somebody that goes to a foreign land, but eats the food from their local neighborhood. They're looking for the fast food diner, if you will, in the foreign land. The traveler is somebody who's going and checking things out, but they still want to stay at a nice hotel. The adventurer are the ones that are right on the bleeding edge. What is this really about? They're trying to catch a heartbeat and understand it from the inside out. You could apply that metaphor for just about every professional adventure as well as every relationship. Is that I think one of the things that we're finding is so challenging for people is we're more connected to our devices than we'd like, and maybe less connected to ourselves and less connected to other people, is that we are losing our way with really having a deep value for the other person's experience. We're wanting our needs met because, damn it, if I flip on a phone and I start scrolling, I can get an instant hit of dopamine and serotonin. I feel good and I'm okay for a little bit. I'm important and whatever.
But that stuff's all bullshit. We all know it's all bullshit. We all know that little hit from the likes and all that stuff.
It's bullshit in the sense that it's not meaningful, but it is flat out powerful in that it does provide an immediate physiological up level.
Do you think we will wake up at some point in time and realize how dangerous it is?
Oh, yeah. Do you remember? I think we're probably close to the same age, but early in my life, when I would get on a plane, there was a smoking section and a non smoking section. Can you imagine that being in a plane right now where there was a smoking section? Yeah, we will know better. And we're already understanding that there's deep risk in EMF. And so the frequencies of Bluetooth and the frequencies of cell phone interfacing on our lap, in our front pocket, and next to our brain through our ear, it's not great. And we're starting to see an emergence of clothing and other modalities that are helping to dampen some of those effects. But yeah, I think that we're on a one-way track with technology. It's really great in a lot of ways. And we also need to use a little bit of common sense about how far away we get from Mother Nature. When I say Mother Nature, I'm not talking about that lake over there or the forest over here or the beach. You and I, we are Mother Nature. We are nature. And so the further we move away from nature, our true self, and or places we can get our feet dirty, if you will, the higher stress that we feel as a way of living. And right now, we are definitely, according to my friend and colleague, Kathleen Hogan, which is the CHRO of Microsoft. And Microsoft has somewhere around 200,000 employees. And she has emphatically put a tall tent pole in this idea that we are experiencing a human energy crisis. And part of that human energy crisis is that it's not that the world has changed and is more stressful. It's that the tide has gone out and we're now aware that many of us have been swimming naked for far too long. We don't have the psychological skills and the protection mechanisms to deal with the change. And there's always been change. This idea that we're in an unprecedented time, I found myself saying that early in the pandemic. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. You know what? It was really beyond difficult in the dark ages. There are parts in the world for the last 20 years that have been some of the most extreme conditions that humans have ever felt. Early, our Native American friends, this land was theirs when we came here, but they never treated it as they owned it. And the amount of death and destruction and suffering that people that migrated here caused there was egregious. And that wasn't that long ago. That was only a couple hundred years ago. So this idea that we're in unprecedented times, I'm just waving my arms and saying bullshit. What's happening is that we have less protective mechanisms because we bought the bullshit that we are lone heroes and hustle hard and get after it and be the hero of, no, be part of a community, be part of something and invest towards the center of creating a rising tide where you're treating other people in ways that have deep regard because you know that we are so deeply connected that that is the only way. I've spent 25 years working with the world's best, literally people that are changing our understanding of potential. Not one of them will say that it happens alone. Nobody does it alone. We need each other.
Here's the trick on this being part of a community. If you start in a community and that's the only community you see and you don't grow beyond it or experience other communities, that's tough. It's back to the exploration part, is to experience and compare and contrast many types of communities. Because I think there's a lot of people that are just going through life in this silent, depression's not the word, but this silent angst because they're in a community that they don't fit in, but they'll do it because they don't know about another option. They've not experienced another option. They never did any exploration. And so this seems like a real tricky part is like, yeah, okay, but what community? Where do we find this community? It's easier said than done, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that as a licensed psychologist, I understand the alone feeling, the sense of isolation that people can have. And I will say that as a best practice for dealing with anxiety, depression, trauma, addiction, a whole host of difficult experiences for people is that giving to a community makes you part of that community. Finding someone or something that you can give to. And that could be a spiritual organization, that could be a community organization, that could be a neighbor. But when people are in pain, and they're struggling, they want their pain to be relieved. And that relief comes from something outside of them often, which is drugs, sex. It comes from somebody else giving them approval, somebody else lifting them up. Again, I want to wave my hands and say, I really understand the isolation that can come from suffering. I say, you're an agent in your life. As an adult, your responsibility is to be able to be responsible for yourself. And that means responding with action and giving to other people, even when you're hurting, even when you're sad, even when you are highly anxious. Give. And that's one of the anecdotes to FOPO is the more you give, the less you're concerned about other people because you're more concerned or interested in their response to the gift rather than to how well you're performing in life, how well you're doing in life. I'm glad you brought that up.
You just also brought up the term drugs. And as I'm looking at your cover and I'm thinking, okay, people taking drugs, and I'm thinking, or people drinking too much or whatever. And then I'm looking at that word mastery. For me, the letting go of that stuff. I drank in high school, all that stuff, and smoked some weed back in the day, whatever. But it's not part of my life now. Because I think if you get on this path towards mastery, you find these communities that you like to be in, you find these challenges that make you wake up every day, then there is no drug or alcohol that can ever beat that. There's nothing. It's impossible. I feel sorry for people that don't get a chance to experience that because, okay, where I'm at right now, look, people drink beer all around the world. But when I go back to America, I find it very unfortunate that so many people that I know, when I see them, family, friends, etc., their whole life is built around alcohol. And I'm like, okay, yeah, they go to work, they have family, friends, all that kind of stuff. Maybe built around is too much, but it's central. It's there. I just want to reach in sometimes and pull it out and say, hey, what are you going to do without it? You might even get a better experience than that high, that artificial high, that drug high. You might even get a better experience if you get your ass on the path to some mastery and something that you truly love versus this wasting of time that you're doing with this artificial stimulant stuff.
There's a difference between a glass here or there and a difference between a glass every time you're social and you're social 4 times a week, and a difference between binging every night consistently. There's different levels to it.
Of course, of course.
And some people are okay at levels 1 and 2, let's call it. And the thing about alcohol, though, I don't want this to be a downer for folks that are not wanting to hear this, but at the same time, there's some hard medical, physiological impacts of alcohol. Let's just stick with it. Now, I'll have a glass here and there. I'm not trying to preach something that I'm not aware of the balance here. Is that one, I recognize, and scientists do, the impact it has on sleep.
On sleep.
Sleep, yeah.
1 ounce of alcohol is going to screw your sleep up that night, every night, guaranteed.
Well, it takes about 90 minutes for me personally to process 1 glass. If I had 2 glasses, I need about 3 hours before it's not disruptive to my sleep. And that means I got to start drinking at 5 because that's a problem in and of itself. But it's not like 1 glass at, say, 7 o'clock and you fall asleep at 11, it screwed you up. It's somewhere for most people, 60 to 90 minutes, and call it the upper limits, 2 hours. So you can manage it there, but there's a cost to liver because it is a poison and we do need to process it. It is a central nervous system depressant, which means that for the most part, it depresses our system. So if you're already feeling sluggish or down or depressed, there's a little freedom that comes from alcohol as a social lubrication. But overall, it's a central nervous system depressant. And when you're feeling the effects of a central nervous system depressant, it's a little bit after the feel-good feeling. There's a come-down feeling. And that's why many people will go for a second class, is they're looking for that up feeling from the alcohol. There's psychological, there's emotional, and there's physiological costs to it. Knowing the costs, I think, is really important in making an informed choice.
We live one time. We don't have life extension yet. I will maintain that the greatest feelings that we can find are in this pursuit of mastery. And as you mentioned, the opportunity cost is if we are going to allow ourselves to spend time doing XYZ, drinking drugs, etc., then that's time in our limited time that we have. That's time that we can't pursue mastery.
That's exactly right.
I'm not trying to be a teetotaler or anything, but I mean, look, when you break it down to the science, when you break it down to time, it is what it is. I think about somebody like Tom Brady. I don't know what Tom Brady's lifestyle is and everything, but I will hazard a guess as I think back to him coming back against the Falcons in that Super Bowl and just you knew, even they were down so far, there was a feeling. And you're like, how did he pull that off? There's been a lot of dedication to craft to pull that off, just to use another sports example. But I just don't think you can get to mastery if you've got too many distractions. FOPO is another distraction.
That's exactly right. Signal to noise ratio is typically reserved for an engineer conversation, but it's also a psychological framework. The noise are all the things that pull you from the essential signal. And the signal can only be experienced when we're talking about mastery in the present moment. And so anything that's pulling you from the present moment is likely noise. And that doesn't mean we don't think about things in the future or the past, but it's intentionally carving out the time to do that and being aware when we are in those frames to try to solve something or unlock something. But it's the excessive worry, it's the excessive future casting or the excessive past rumination that competes with the required attention in the present moment to be able to adjust eloquently towards our highest potential in the unfolding, unpredictable present moment. And so you're right on it. It's a psychological framework that I think is very powerful. And if you go back to that feeling when you have 2 or 3 drinks in you and there's a sloshy feeling that you have inside, you're not at your very best. Most of the time, people are not at their very best. And I will say tongue in cheek, when it comes to sports like golf, people are so up in their head when they play golf. I do not play golf, but it's a tongue in cheek when a golfer comes to me and they say, man, what can I do? I'm just up in my head too much. Take a shot of tequila or do some real psychological work so it's sustainable. One of those two is a way through.
Mention the present moment, spending a decade living in a Buddhist country through the process of osmosis. I'm sure this intense American guy that you're speaking to has calmed himself down some, but it's all we got. There is no past. There is no future. It's right now. Yes, we can plan for things. We can make longer term decisions, but right now is right now, and it's all we got. And we have to make decisions right now.
Yeah, it's so great when we're clear and connected in the present moment. It's easy when it's easy. When it's all good, so to speak, it's really easy to be our very best. But this idea of mastery is to be able to do it when there's stress on board, when there's some pressure, when it's a highly emotional conversation or engagement. Can you do it then? Can you be your very best or even near your very best when emotions are flowing, when there's real or perceived danger or threat or risk in the environment? Can you be your best then? Can you give all of yourself in a loving way to whatever that task is? And that task could be a conversation with your partner, or it could be trying to hit a round ball with a round bat as fast as you possibly can, whatever the challenge is. That's why I love that we're having this conversation, because I think you know this to be true, and I imagine your community does as well, without repeating the obvious, is that there's so much more to go. There's so much more inside of us. The great unlock comes from investing in your psychology. That is the great unlock for most of us. And it's an under-tapped resource. And so it's an exciting time for psychology right now, for sure.
This podcast started as a trading podcast all these years ago, but I would have to say that some of my most famous and favorite conversations on this podcast are with psychologists, because we can just talk about people. We can talk about the human condition, and that's always fun. Maybe there's going to be a nugget that we can all learn from, or something that will strike us, ignite us, turn us on. That often happens with psychologists. And psychologists can't help themselves, let's be honest. And for me as an interviewer, I can usually get psychologists to open up. You guys can't play it safe. It's almost impossible.
Yeah, I think that that's right. And I feel that much of this conversation has been maybe a bit esoteric. I want to make sure that there's very concrete things that your community can do to be just a little bit better. And that is why we wrote the book. And so there's a lot of very practical applied ways towards working to be your very best. But maybe one practice that is super simple practice people could do, and maybe your community is already doing it, but just having some way that you activate particular parts of your brain or your psychology in the morning before you get out of bed or before you leave the house. waking up particular parts of yourself are very important. One of the things that we found to be meaningful is like 60 to 90 seconds. And it's before we get out of bed. And when people email me, I can send them an audio file to be very specific about this. But first thing is just take a moment and have a couple breaths. So just send signals to your brain that you're okay. Get to the signal, take control of yourself, a couple long exhales, really, before you get into the stress of the world, take care of yourself in that way. And that only takes a few seconds. And the second thing is a few beats, a few moments of gratitude, but really feel what you're grateful for. This is not a check the box moment. And the third is to use your imagination to see you being great later, thinking about your intention for the day or having your imagination wander to something that's important for you later in the day and just seeing yourself be great in that moment. And then the fourth is just take a moment, pull your sheets off, just take a moment to be right where your body is, just to be fully there. And those four practices, breath, gratitude, imagery, and be where your body is, it's a really nice practice before the day starts to get to the signal and ignore it, tune down the noise.
Michael, I appreciate it. The book, everyone can check it out. The First Rule of Mastery. Stop worrying about what people think of you. Great title. Hey, where can we send people to check you out? Where's the best website?
findingmastery.com/book is a place to see all the bonuses and the bundles that we have for pre-orders. And I would hope that people could help me out and pre-order. It would mean a lot to me personally. There's also some fun bonuses and packages there. And you can find the podcast and everything else there as well. findingmastery.com/book.
I could probably take you down a 4 or 5 hour conversation. You'd forget you were on the microphone eventually. I'm pretty sure I could get you there.
I love the conversations. I enjoyed our last one and I'm grateful for this one as well. So thank you. I really appreciate being in this with you.
Hey, Michael, take care. I appreciate it again. And keep me posted on any future work.
Yeah, you got it. All the best.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.